Okay, everyone, welcome to the Research Ethics and Policy series. I'm Holly Fernandez-Lynch, and I co-lead the series with Steve Jaffe. And today it's my pleasure to welcome our department's own Anna Wexler, who's going to be giving a lecture titled Ethical Dimensions of Implanted Brain-Computer Interface Research. I'll say a couple more words of introduction for Anna in just a second, but I'll go through a couple of our normal housekeeping announcements first. Next month, maybe you can see that on December 9th, we'll have a lecture from Christine Grady on the 25th anniversary of her article, What Makes Clinical Research Ethical? And you can find a full listing of our reps' upcoming speakers on the department's website. As always, please send me or Steve names of people that you'd like to hear from in the series. With that yellow boxes. We have a number of research ethics online courses that are available for free, some of which can satisfy Penn and CHOP IRB training requirements. So please take a look at those on the website you see here. And then, as always, thank you to our several reps sponsors and to Lisa Bailey for helping organize the series. Okay, so Anna Wexler is Assistant Professor of Medical Ethics and Health Policy here at PSOM and an expert in neuroethics. She's PI of the Wexler Lab, where she studies the ethical, legal, and social issues surrounding emerging technology. And she's particularly interested in DIY medicine, citizen science, direct-to-consumer health products, online patient communities, neuroscience technology, and alternative neurotherapies. She's the recipient of a 2018 NIH Director's Early Independence Award, serves on the board of the International Neuroethics Society, and is an associate editor of AJOB Neuroscience and the Journal of Cognitive Enhancement. And when Anna completes her lecture, we'll be able to take questions from those of you online, as well as those of you who are in the room. Okay, Anna, take it away.
Okay, so today I'm going to be talking to you about ethical dimensions of brain-computer interfaces. I guess that's from the, we were trying to get like a video. Yeah. You know what, why don't I can go up to that YouTube video, we could play it and then we could try to get that yellow thing off the screen. Okay. I mean, I could just go through the top, yeah. All right. So this is my talk outline. That's not my talk outline, this is. So I'm going to be giving you a bit of background on the landscape of implanted brain-computer interfaces. There has been so much going on in the last 18 months. It's really quite incredible, so buckle up. I am going to talk about three sort of hot topic ethical issues. Device abandonment and continuing responsibilities, neural data privacy, and consumer neurotechnology. And then I'm going to talk about some ways that ethicists are now thinking about addressing some of these issues. I guess there's no way I can see the slides here. I just looked.
Yeah,
and I should say there's a lot more ethical issues that I could talk about, but you know, for the sake of brevity, I'm just focusing on these three today. So, and none of these are going to be about specific research project, although I do have sort of related projects in each of these domains, specifically in the area of consumer neurotechnology. Okay, so starting with the iBCI landscape. So the idea that we can connect our minds or our brains to computers has a really long history. You can see here, this is from the 60s. This is X-Men on the left, related to sort of communicating telepathically with machines or telepathically with other people. And on the right, this is from Star Trek, related to uploading our experiences or consciousness to a machine. So very long history. More recently, people like to bring up Black Mirror, Severance. Again, also really good depictions of these sort of sci-fi mind-machine interactions. But this might be, you know, this sort of sci-fi notion of brain-computer interfaces might be inching a bit closer to reality. This is a headline from last year. Elon Musk's Neuralink shows first patient using its brain implant. a man paralyzed in a diving accident moves the computer cursor with his thoughts. So this is him right here. This is Noland Arbaugh. And I wanted to play you a short clip, which is why we're struggling with this yellow thing on the screen. So this is Neuralink doing a live demo of its first patient. And they did this on X. That's the way they of course, release the information. I just wanted to show you a clip of that. So you can go to the next slide, Lisa. Let's see if we can get the. We're gonna skip the part where we meet the dogs, and I think we got turn up. Sorry, 36. I think we might need to turn up the volume. The cursor is moving. He's moving the cursor with his thoughts. Yeah. So, that was Neuralink's first live demo. So hopefully you caught that, but he's controlling this cursor with a brain chip that's implanted. He's in his home. There's no wires around any part of the head, and he was even able to sort of pause the music afterwards. Okay, so Noland is not the first person to get a BCI. There have been many dozens, less than 100, but many dozens of people who've had implanted brain-computer interfaces. The picture on the left is a very famous patient, Kathy Hutchinson. Back in 2012, she was able to use her thoughts. She was paralyzed also from the shoulders down after a stroke. She was able to use her thoughts to bring that drink right to her mouth and take a sip. So that was back in 2012. So what is a BCI, or a brain-computer interface? So at its most basic level, you have a device that captures signals, that records signals from the brain, does some analysis, analyzes those signals and translates them into some kind of output. Okay, so you have a user, right? There's some kind of hardware that's implanted. When we're talking about implanted BCI, that's implanted into the brain. The signals are sent out usually externally to a computer. There's a lot of fancy analysis that happens, and then it's translated into some kind of output. So for example, moving a computer cursor, controlling a robotic arm, using a wheelchair, and this is a speller. There's other things we could do now. This is a bit oversimplified, but this is the basic schematic. So today I'm mostly going to be, I think, exclusively focusing on implanted BCIs, iBCIs, and those are just means that the signal acquisition hardware is implanted inside it. So the gold standard for BCI research academia has been this Utah array that's been used for many years now. So this is on the bottom left there, that's a sort of a blown up picture. This device is actually really quite small. That's implanted inside the head. And then there's a pedestal you could see over here that sits outside the head. And then there's a wire, right? This is tethered. And then a wire transmits the data to a computer for analysis. This has about 100 channels. The channels reflect sort of the bandwidth, the data that is coming through the device. So this has been what's been used, in BCI research in academia for the last several decades. What we have now is a lot of innovation on the hardware side, and I think it's kind of fun just to show you what people are working on right now. So this is the last video and animation that I have. Let's see if this works. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so this is the Neuralink device. So there's a hole drilled in the head. The chip gets implanted in. That chip has different hairs that sort of come out. The hairs are actually or threads is the proper word, not hair. There are I believe 64 different hairs with 16 different electrodes on each that collects the data. It transmits the data wirelessly to an app, and that allows the person to control the computer on the screen, just like that. Other companies are working on other kinds of approaches. Okay. We played it. Um, you just try hitting the play button at the bottom there, and you could scroll past, yeah, maybe a little further. Going. Yeah, so there's another company called Synchron, you'll see in a minute. They avoid neurosurgery altogether, and what they do is implant an electrode inside a stent that is threaded. The stent is inside a blood vessel that's through the brain. So they thread that up. So that's like another, any other stenting procedure, but it's just going into the brain. This is a device from Paradromics, another sort of innovative device. And this is one from Precision Neuroscience, sort of has a flexible film. Okay, we're done with videos and animations. So there are 5 big players in the iBCI space. There's obviously more companies, but 5 really big ones. These are them. I just showed you the animations from all of them except for BlackRock. BlackRock is the company that makes the Utah, right? That gold standard device that I told you about. And there's been a massive amount of investment in this space. I was just adding up the numbers just from the last 3 years. This is what that looks like. So Neuralink has raised almost $1 billion alone just in the last 3 years. So that's a total of 1.7 billion. And if you think about that in comparison to the typical funds that NIH gives through the Brain Initiative to fund neurotechnology projects, this is 1.7 billion that's gone to essentially 5 products. By contrast, the same amount of funding for the Brain Initiative has been $1.4 billion that's been spread across hundreds of different projects, hundreds of different investigators. So really a massive amount of money just devoted to these 5 products. So where is iBCI now? So we really have this unprecedented private investment, and it's from fairly big names. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, even Sam Altman just announced that he's the CEO of OpenAI. He's starting his own brain-computer interface company or investing in one called Merge Labs. We have significant innovations in this hardware, right? These wireless devices with a lot of them have far more recording capabilities. It's thought that more recording capabilities, right? More data, just more capabilities, in terms of outputs and function. And we have improvements in software. So the AI revolution, if we want to call it that, or just advances in AI have really enabled better decoding, right? Us to better understand what's going on in the brain. Actually, we're not understanding, right? It's actually enabled. At first, we thought, we'd have to actually understand how the brain is working and understand the neural mechanisms. But with AI, we can actually kind of skip that at least somewhat if we can train models that are good enough. And so right now we have the first company-sponsored human iBCI trial. So companies are conducting safety and feasibility studies. Right now, it's mostly for control applications. So moving cursors on the screen, controlling a robotic arm. And these are in patients with ALS and spinal cord injury. On the horizon, we have speech and communication. There's really cool work that's going on now. Trying to decode intended speech, intended thought, that sort of thing. Vision restoration and motor control. And it's looking increasingly likely that iBCIs will receive FDA approval in the near future. Again, we're in phase 1, but things are sort of slowly moving forward. And it's actually, BCIs have been in the lab for many decades, and now we're actually getting to company-sponsored early stage trials, which means they might actually be here, in the next 5 years as an approved device. Okay, so what are some of the ethical issues with iBCIs? I'm going to start with device abandonment and continuing responsibilities, and I'm going to start with this story. Here, this is from an article in Nature from a few years ago. This man here is a German man who suffers from cluster headaches, which is a really debilitating neurological condition that causes an extreme amount of pain. headache attacks that last for days at a time. It's actually more painful than childbirth. I didn't believe that at first. I looked it up. True, I'm pain rating scales. And in 2013, he bought a device, or he got a device made by a company called iBCI. It was on the market in Europe, got it implanted in his head, and it worked. And he said it gave him his life back. He was reborn and he was able to function where he hadn't been able to function before. 6 years later, this company went bankrupt, leaving this individual and I think 700 other people with these devices that were not supported. This device had a very customized battery, so it wasn't easy to replace the battery. He had physicians that were helping him calibrate the software, and the physicians couldn't even get into the software package anymore. This is not a unique case. So here's another one that got a lot of attention a number of years ago. This is a company called Second Sight. So these individuals here are blind. They had retinal implants from Second Sight. Here too, the company went bankrupt. And these people were left with, as our article says, bionic eyes that are now obsolete and unsupported. And the eyes, so it didn't restore their vision, but it gave them some sort of crude vision that helped them navigate the world a bit more independently and a bit more comfortably. But they were left with this technology that's hardware implanted with no support. Another two cases are spinal cord stimulators, new Vectra and StimWave technologies, also implanted devices. Companies filed for bankruptcy, participants left devices. So again, just to illustrate, these are not unique cases that I'm showing you here. So this raises the issue of what's been called device abandonment, and it's corollary of what we talk about in neuroethics of continuing responsibility. So what are the responsibilities of various stakeholders, companies to support individuals in cases like these? So the examples I've showed you relate to companies, but this is also, right, these issues come into play when we're thinking about research as well. And I like to use this graph from Hendricks et al. To illustrate that. So here we have a patient who agrees to enroll in an implanted device trial. This middle part here sort of shows you the ideal scenario, right? So the patient's enrolled in the trial, patient benefits, the device gets approved, right? The device makes its way into clinical care after some insurance and reimbursement negotiations. More than not, right? A trial fails before getting to the stage, but you could have a participant that benefits, an individual participant that benefits, and that benefit could be extreme, right? Like in the cluster headache case, it gave that individual his life back, right? So what happens if you have the patient benefits, but the trial discontinues prematurely, right? Maybe the early, outcome measures are not looking good. The sponsor decides to end the trial. What if the device, the trial goes through, but the data isn't good enough and the FDA doesn't approve the device? Or what if there's some issue with insurance and the device is not adequately covered by insurance, or maybe the individual participant doesn't have insurance coverage options? In all these cases, right, you also have a patient who has a device that's benefiting them, right? Again, sometimes to an extreme degree. And is left with, no support, right? So there might be follow-up visits, there might be battery replacements needed, device repair, and device removal. So there are no easy solutions. There are no answers here. There's a lot of questions that we have in the neuroethics space. And there's no one procedure or policy that people follow. It's basically just a patchwork. And each institution and each researcher figures it out for themselves. So what are the long-term ethical and financial responsibilities of various stakeholders, right? I'm not going to put up any answers here, but right, there's a lot of stakeholders involved in the space. So you have investigators, you have institutions like Penn, where research like this is being conducted, and we do research like this here at Penn. We have funders, private funders and federal funders, device manufacturers, insurance companies, regulators. So many different stakeholders in this space, and unclear how each of them should be contributing. Who's responsible for maintenance of implanted neurotechnology when a company folds, right? So there's the research case, and then there's the case where the device is actually in the market, right? Who's responsible in these situations? Do we need new policies and laws to ensure continuing support for users of these devices and for participants in this kind of research? The answer is probably yes. Right now, the only thing that we have that I'm familiar with is long-term plans. And these are required by the NIH on a subset of their grants that involve, investigative neurotechnology. So, the highest risk kind of grants. So NIH requires those. They have neuroethicists sit on study section to help review those long-term plans. I am one of those people. There is no rubric. We've asked for like, how are we supposed to review, what are the criteria by which we're supposed to review, and there is none. So we just kind of make a call. It's not a scoring feature, so it doesn't actually play into whether you get the grant or not. We just discuss it at study section. But I think more importantly, the NIH has no way of enforcing these long-term plans, right? So the NIH is giving, an investigator or investigators, right, a multi-year contract. These long-term plans, right, could be relevant for 10, 20, 30, 40 years into the future. And there's just no mechanism to enforce that. People have brought up, ideas of IRBs or even the FDA requiring long-term plans. To my knowledge, they do not at this point in time. Other policies and laws that have been suggested are having sort of a mandated insurance policy for people who participate in this research or investigators who conduct this research. It's sort of been floated. There hasn't really been anything that's been super clear that's been put out there, right? Who should contribute to it? Is it the institution? Is it the investigator? On what subset of research should there be there? And for what, should companies also have to contribute? Another idea that's been floated is mandatory contributions to national funds. So having some sort of tax or mandatory contribution that device manufacturers have to pay into. One proposal is to have this look like the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. I think that's what it's called, where there are mandatory contributions in for each vaccine that's given from the manufacturer of the vaccine. And then there's a separate organization or panel that decides how to disperse those funds. This is a really important issue. I think in neuroethics, maybe one of the most important issues. And as you can see, there's not really any clear solutions at this point. Okay, coming to the next issue I want to cover, neural data privacy, another super duper hot topic in neuroethics. And one of the main questions here is, do neurotechnologies raise unique privacy issues, privacy concerns? There are two camps here. I want to say at least two camps. On the one hand, there are people who say, yes, absolutely. The brain is the most sensitive organ in our body. And I like this quote: with advances in neural engineering, brain imaging, and pervasive neurotechnology, the mind might no longer be such an unassailable fortress, right? So this idea that the brain is sort of the last bastion of privacy and we need to do everything we can to protect it. And also, if any of you guys have read Nita Farahani's book, she sort of, argues along similar lines. The other camp says, well, brain data may be newish, but the privacy concerns brain data raises are all too familiar. And there the view is, well, actually the inferences that people have expressed concern about, right, that maybe it can reveal some of your mental states or behavior or maybe a medical condition, actually can be, those same inferences can be revealed by many other technologies, by other sorts of things. I'm in this camp just to show my cards, and this is what I've written before. The reams of personal data being gathered about us from phones, web browsers, credit cards, smart homes are being aggregated and sold with little oversight. Some of this information, particularly my search engine history, emails, and notes, are more revealing about who I am than my neural data may ever be. I would add in sort of AI into that now. I wrote this a while back. So this is the second camp, which is that maybe we should be concerned, not that privacy isn't a concern, but that the privacy concerns do look familiar. The first camp has been much louder and more active in lobbying. And they argue that not only neural data is unique, but that current laws are insufficient to protect neural data privacy. A neuroscientist at Columbia named Rafa Yuste founded this organization called the Neuro Rights Foundation. They have been extremely active. They even collaborated with Werner Herzog on a film that was released a few years ago, again, to campaign for what they're calling neural rights one of which is greater protection of mental privacy. They started off in Chile and Latin America. They had the Chilean Constitution. They've been very effective. They had the Chilean Constitution amended to protect mental integrity. They had a Brazilian state that got passed a law related to mental integrity. And just in the last 12 months or so, maybe 18 months, it has made its way to the United States. I don't know if any of you guys have seen these headlines. First came along Colorado, protecting brain data. And what they were doing here was amending existing state consumer privacy laws to explicitly include neural data as something that is protected under the state consumer privacy law. So it started off with Colorado, then California, then Montana, and then Connecticut. So we have 4 laws specifically protecting neural data in the United States. 3 of them are consumer privacy laws. The Montana one is a standalone. It protects both genetic information and neural data. It's not sort of within the consumer privacy, within a consumer privacy statute. Another question that's very hotly debated in this space is that if we do need new laws, and again, there's a heated disagreement about each one of these questions and a lot of debate in the literature, right? Even if we do need new laws, right? How should we write those laws, right? How should they be constructed? Should they be specific to neural data, or more broadly protect information about mental states? So the Neural Rights Foundation argues that neural data is, its own category. It's very specific. Only neural data we need to protect. We can't include anything else like, other technologies, because then, things get sort of watered down. On the other hand, you have people saying, look, going back to the inferences, you can infer a lot of private information about mental states from wearable technologies and biometrics. So the Apple Watch, these are Meta's glasses and their new headband. They track eye gaze and wrist movements. Facial emotion recognition technology is pretty good, right? You can infer mental states from that as well. So do we write the laws, again, if you believe that we need new laws, do you write the laws such that they are specific to the source, right? Do they cover just neural data, or do they cover like mental state inferences that can be made through a variety of wearables and other technology? This has gotten extremely heated just in the last few months. This is a draft recommendation from the UN that goes into effect, I believe, next week. Recently sort of voted on the ethics of neurotechnology, and the UN did include other data. So they did not just include neural data, they turned to other data as well. They say they include indirect neural data and non-neural data allowing mental state inferences, a little bit wordy, in their recommendation for neurotechnology, because they say even if these technologies are not neurotechnology per se, they're used to generate information that can interpret or predict mental states, raises similar ethical and human rights issues as neurotechnology. So UN has it included, right, went a little bit more broad. This is the AMA, the Neural Rights Foundation, campaigned very successfully with the AMA, got them to pass a resolution back in July, basically defining, setting out their definition of neural data, and specifically saying that the AMA opposes any efforts to broaden the consensus medical definition of neural data to include data inferred from non-neural information gathered by other biosensors, as this is a distinct category of data with its own independent qualities and regulatory needs. So again, pretty powerful playwright AMA, the UN, right, having very different approaches here. Where this is playing out, I think, in a very interesting way, is at these meetings of the Uniform Law Commission that I've been attending. So the Uniform Law Commission is a nonprofit organization that when there is, different states adopting similar laws, they look and they see, is there a model law, or should there be uniformity across states? Is there a need for something like this? So there is a committee right now that's in the very early stages of assessing, sort of a pre-committee to assess whether there should be a committee to even then take more seriously the question of whether there needs to be a uniform law. But there's these committee meetings happening now on a monthly basis, attended by privacy scholars. There's been a few senators that have showed up, and they're basically looking into, right, should we have a uniform law, given that there's this patchwork across the states, and the states have mostly focused on neural data, right, protecting neural data, and not mental privacy, and not, other technologies as a whole. So had a meeting yesterday with them and it was very heated. So this is sort of where it's in part from playing out. Because this is reps, I just wanted to bring this to thinking about how this would affect research that's being conducted here at Penn, for example. So how might these laws affect neuroscience research? So, I mentioned there's only 4 state laws. There's a lot, I think there's at least 10, maybe 12 other bills that have been proposed that are sort of working their way through different states like Vermont and Massachusetts and a few others. But right now, 3 of the 4 laws that have been passed do have carve outs for research. So they say, California, for example, exempts information collected as part of a clinical trial or other biomedical research. That's under the consumer privacy law, right? So it has a bit of a carve out, but Montana does not. Maybe differences, there might be differences for different kinds of research. So the California exemption is for biomedical research, not non-biomedical research. What does biomedical research mean? So, there's a lot of complication in thinking about how this might apply at a state level. There's also variation in scope. So some of the laws apply to all entities processing neural data, like the Montana law, whereas the California Consumer Privacy Act applies to certain businesses only. So to think about who the law would apply to. Also academic research that utilizes commercial neurotechnology, sort of off the shelf recording devices or FNIRS headsets. Sometimes that data is recorded, then sent to the company's cloud for processing. So if there's another business entity who's actually doing some of the processing of the data, would that make them sort of fall under the scope of some of these laws? It doesn't affect us in Pennsylvania at the moment, although again, if you're a business, I don't know how it might affect if someone's using an off-the-shelf data that's processed in California, possible that it does. But I just want to say that there's no proposed bill. There's not even a bill that I've seen that's on the table in Pennsylvania, to my knowledge. So anyway, this is interesting to think about. I think I don't think many researchers are actually paying attention to this. And so there's, neuroscience research that goes on in the medical context, but there's also neuroscience research going on, in healthy individuals using other methods of recording brainwave data that these laws might end up applying to. So interesting space to track. And again, it's all very new and feels like it's happening very quickly. Okay. The last issue I want to talk about is consumer neurotechnology. This is an area I've studied for a very long time. And so I've studied, so right now what exists on the market is non-implanted devices marketed directly to consumers to either record their brain waves or to provide levels of stimulation to their brain. So that market has existed for about 15, almost 20 years now, and I spent a lot of time looking into this space. But again, these are non-implanted devices, right? So yeah. And so what we have now is we have this notion of an iBCI, of an implanted brain-computer interface, potentially making its way to the public. So this is Neuralink's mission statement. Neuralink is Elon Musk's brain-computer interface company. Create a generalized brain interface to restore autonomy to those with unmet medical needs today and unlock human potential tomorrow. So you see they're starting with the unmet medical needs today, and tomorrow is unlocking human potential. And Elon Musk has been very clear that his goal in starting Neuralink was that he didn't want AI to leave humans in the dust. He says on a recent podcast, he said that if AI talks to humans, it would be like talking to a tree because we're so slow and responding, right? When the AI is very fast. So he wanted to create these brain-computer interfaces to give us a leg up in the race against AI dominance. So 5 years ago, you could be like, all right, Elon Musk talking, whatever he's talking, like we don't really have to actually pay attention to that too much. It's just Elon Musk making these crazy predictions. It still might be that, but something's changed. And what's changed is that other companies who initially were only talking about medical uses are now saying the same thing. What's also changed is that AI has gotten a lot better and has actually sort of, been really taken up by the public in a much bigger way since Elon Musk's initial confirmation. So this is precision neuroscience. This is one of their slides that they had from a talk I was at. That was the last one in the animation I showed you of the sort of thin film going across the brain. And they're one of those big five companies. So they talk about medical necessity today. And then their second one is everyday enhancement, able-bodied people seeking to increase efficiency, performance. So it's going to enhance us at work. And so the idea is that we'd be able to interact with computers a lot more quickly than we normally do, maybe interact directly, brain to brain with each other if we were all walking around with these brain-computer interface implants. And so that's precision. Paradromics was another company that I showed you. That was the second to last one with the little circle and a few things implanted. They also hadn't mentioned publicly, anyway, their goals for this to be a consumer product. But this is a report just from last month. This was the second annual BCI, New York BCI conference. Paradromics founder and CEO Matt Engel there spoke openly about his dual vision as a precisely defined medical device, as well as the platform technology to turn capital-intensive R&D into applications that unlock a broader future. You can see the same kind of language starting to pop up. But a lot of these companies are now talking about this like a platform, comparing it to an iPhone, right? Saying, well, we're making this. We don't know what's, everyone else are going to develop the apps for that, right? We're just making the hardware. We're making the phone, essentially. And we don't know the phone that's going to interface with the brains. And we don't know what this is going to look like in the future. So that was Paradromics. That was the first time that I've seen that publicly stated. I'll mention one other one. This is BlackRock Neurotech. I showed you this image before. This was the gold standard in BCIs in academic context. The Utah array, this is the Utah array. It's almost synonymous. Like when you think BCI in academic medical context, it's the Utah array for the hardware. So it's been, synonymous with medical applications, medical devices, academic BCI. And they have been working on this next generation, wireless, flexible neural lace is what they're calling it. Just last week, one of the VPs at BlackRock came to Penn, gave a talk. And on the slides, which I didn't take a picture of, and I regret not taking a picture of, but he had the 0 to 15 year as being medtech applications and the 15 to 30 year as being enhancement, which was pretty shocking because this is like a company like Medtronic suddenly saying, I know Medtronic's not as big as BlackRock, but this is a company that's been so entrenched in the medical device space. It's as if Medtronic would suddenly be like, and we're going to start doing enhancement stuff next. So it was pretty shocking, and it was pretty crazy that they were so open about it. It's not as surprising when you see who invested in them last year. So this is a cryptocurrency company called Tether. They invested $200 million in BlackRock Neurotech last year. They became the majority stakeholder in BlackRock. And they say, this is on their website, they stand at the intersection of innovation and human potential, dedicated to propelling humanity into a future where technology and human capabilities merge in unprecedented ways. And you could see they're not really about the medical. This is not giving like ALS and spinal cord vibes here. This is like people living in floating houses vibes. So, that's probably why BlackRock is talking about their enhancement efforts. So anyway, it was pretty surprising to hear that straight from BlackRock. So that's where we're at right now. And essentially companies are developing these medical BCIs really as a stepping stone for these non-medical or future applications, which is really interesting to think about. So I have a project that I'm just at the start of, which is starting to think about what does this mean, right? What are the implications of this? So, it's not unusual to have science being conducted for one reason, right? Or the advances of science or medicine that, are for one purpose being used later for a different purpose. That's not unusual at all. And we think of classic dual use examples. We might think of reconstructive surgery. So advances in reconstructive surgery may be used to support cosmetic or aesthetic surgery later down the line, right? That people don't tend to have issue with that, right? That's how that has emerged. Other examples, right? You can have basic biological research, and we might have concerns about their later use for military use or nefarious purposes and things like that. But in all those cases, right, those consequences are indirect, right? So it tends to happen a bit later, different companies, different people with different goals. And so I think what's really interesting here is that there's both a direct link and a strategic link between these medical and consumer applications, right? So you have the CEO of Paradromics talking about a dual vision and companies becoming increasingly open about these dual intentions. And their trials are serving as proof of concept for broader utility in the consumer population. So Neuralink, with its first patient is already trying to surpass normal human computer interaction speeds to become above average, right? To become super fast at, doing whatever video games he's doing or whatever that WebGrid game that he's playing. And data from these research participants may inform both the medical device and future consumer products. So it's more of a interesting meddling or blurring than I think we typically think about when we think about classic dual use cases. So is this a problem? Is it not? Some people say, I don't, why is this an issue, right? They're doing some good along the way. Should we, that's fine. There are lots of dual use cases out there. I wanted to present this data. This is from Pew, who do really great US population studies. So they did a survey of US adults about their perceptions on AI and neurotechnology and enhancement. And this is from 2022. In their survey, people felt that computer brain chip implants to far more quickly and accurately process information would be meddling. 63% felt that this would be meddling with nature and crossing a line that we should not cross. And they break it out by religious commitment. Those with higher religious commitment tend to agree with that a little bit more versus, 35% said, we're always trying to better ourselves and this is no different. So at least some percentage of the US population feels like this is crossing a line we as a society should not be crossing. So I've started to think about in this research project that I have, what are the ethical implications today of companies' use goals, dual use goals? And we can get to the tomorrow because those are the really big questions, like should we be even going here? What does this mean? But I think about what can we think about today? And so specifically, I've been thinking about some research ethics questions, and this is, still sort of in the early stages of thinking about it. So any feedback you have would be helpful. Questions about data ownership, right? So if you are a participant in the trial that is one of those who believes that, this is crossing a line and you want your device for medical purposes, but you don't want your data or any part of your of the experiment or the research to be able to support the consumer device, right? Do you have the right to restrict your data to medical uses only and not for its use for consumer products? Are companies' long-term consumer goals affecting the design or conduct of clinical trials? And I've been thinking about that just this last week in the context of Tether's investment in BlackRock and that slideshow that the individual from BlackRock gave last week, right? If you have this majority stakeholder they're investing because they want to see that future of us living in, flying houses, is that affecting the medical goals of the company? What does this mean for IRBs, right? Should IRBs set boundaries for when a study moves from restorative to augmentative aims? Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. Right now, it's just, all blurry, I think. And for informed consent, so what should be disclosed to participants, right? Do the company's long-term goals, immediate and long-term goals matter? Should participants be aware of it, or is this not considered sort of relevant information for them? So those are some of the things I'm starting to think about now. And so what are the bigger questions, right? Like what are the future ethical implications of this kind of neurotechnology? These are all really big things, right? So potential to impact autonomy, agency. People have started talking about manipulation and user engagement. So the same way that social media, right, sort of captures our attention. What if you can have a direct read from the brain? And that's also sort of endlessly capturing our attention. In ethics, when we talk about, especially neuroethics, when we talk about enhancement, who would have access to these devices, who wouldn't? And I should say this is a big if, right? Like if we get there. So I want to make that clear. I'm generally actually a very skeptical person, but I do think that because of the amount invested in the space and because of the company's express goals, I do think that we actually have to start taking this fairly seriously at the moment, at least thinking about the future possibilities. And then are we opening a Pandora's box? And actually one person at one of these companies actually said this to me when he was talking to me about their goals. I think we are opening a Pandora's box is what he said, and we're not sure what's going to happen. And we need ethicists to help figure that out. I'm not sure we can, but anyway, the question is, are we opening a Pandora's box by even going in this direction of non-medical research? Some people say yes. So this was a paper published by some of my colleagues back in August, calling for a moratorium on implanted non-medical neurotech until the effects on the mind are properly understood. I don't even think this is possible to have moratorium because, there's the goals are so intertwined, right? As they're advancing the medical application, they're simultaneously advancing the non-medical application. So it's not going to be like, okay, we stopped doing the medical and now we're starting to do the consumer. Okay, so covered three sort of big things. You can see a lot going on in the last year and a half here. So how can we address some of these issues? Or soft law, and right now we have a lot of policies, a lot of guidelines, a lot of framework, many dozens of them. And I actually have a project. I mean, I could show you some here. So this is that's from the OECD. This is the UN document that I mentioned. This is, questions for international brain initiatives. This is from the UK Regulatory Horizons Council. This is a paper for the NIH. This is another paper that I was actually part of. This is IEEE, electrical engineering. They have a neuroethics framework. I could have put, several dozen more on here, but we have tons and tons of frameworks and guidelines. Not as many as in AI. In AI, there's hundreds of AI ethics frameworks. In neuroethics, we have dozens. We still have a lot. And still people are calling for more frameworks and ethics guardrails and guidelines. So a colleague and I have a project actually looking at, what does it mean to actually produce these guidelines and are they effective? And what do we, why do we keep putting more of these things out? So I'll just say I'm not sure that they do that much. People are still calling for more of them. And we have quite a few. We have laws on the book. So I mentioned that we have laws to protect parental privacy. So those passed in the 4 states. For the other issue I mentioned, right, device abandonment and continuing responsibility, we have suggested policies. I talked about these 2 policies. There hasn't even, aside from one sort of clear policy suggestion, there really hasn't been that much else in this space, to my knowledge. But we have some suggested policies. Consumer neurotechnology, again, this is very much in the future. I'm in the middle of writing about what the regulation of this might look like and the rollout. And so thinking about like, if there are sort of levers, regulatory hard law levers that could be in place, and to do so, thinking about actually what the rollout would look like. But there also could be offshore development of this in Honduras. There is sort of this special zone where Silicon Valley transhumanist types experiment with all sorts of gene editing and longevity stuff. So, even if it's not possible in the US, and I think there actually is a route for this to be possible in the US, it's very possible that this would just, go offshore, would go outside the US, and it would become sort of a medical tourism thing for the wealthy. And they have the ground, they have the place already for that. Okay, other collaborative approaches. We talked about hard law, soft law. I just wanted to mention one project I have now, which I think is an example of a collaborative approach. So thinking about ways, if we don't have sort of if we don't think the guidelines are working, and obviously hard law, not so easy to just, implement that or create it. What are other ways that we can sort of collaborate? I have a pilot project right now funded by the Dana Foundation, where Juhi Faruqi, he's over here. She's embedded within a neurotechnology startup developing miniaturized implants for treatment refractory depression. And we're trying to see, what more collaboration, direct collaboration, that's not consultation between industry and ethicist might look like. And then I just wanted to give mention to this organization, the iBCI Collaborative Community, which is a new community. It just started 2 years ago. It brings together, it's an FDA collaborative community, which brings together FDA, NIH, companies, researchers, patients, ethicists, other stakeholders, to meet and to have sort of in a pre-competitive space where there's all different working groups and committees that are doing some very interesting work. So that's it. So really exciting space, a lot happening, a lot more that we're going to see happen in the next few years. I mentioned just a few ethical issues, right? There's a lot more And I just will mention, I didn't get a chance to cover this in the talk today, but I do have a small piece, 'cause I wanted to sort of focus broadly on iBCIs and not focus on Neuralink, even though I could talk for an hour just about Neuralink. But I do have this piece in Stat, which looks at Elon Musk's unorthodox approach to medical science, so how Neuralink is sort of upending the traditional norms of doing science and what that means. So happy to talk about that. And if you're interested, you can check it out. Thank you very much.
Questions in the room?
Yeah.
Hi, very great talk, thank you. You talked about the high level of people like Elon Musk and Bezos and Gates and so forth. Are there any community-based groups that are being kind of focus grouped to find out what their feelings are about the use of this kind of technology and how it might affect their communities?
So many of the companies have community advisory boards, the extent to which they are consulted and the degree to which they are consulted, I'm not sure. But there are sort of limited community advisory boards. I'm not aware of broader focus group efforts, and I don't think there's anything been assessing sort of general population perspectives on consumer neurotechnology. That's a good question.
I have one online that I'm
Yeah.
happy to read. It's actually, I'm going to combine them from the same person, Anthony Brown. So first he asks, how many public or private institutions are pushing toward some kind of insurance model where developers are required to pay into a fund in the eventuality that they abandon their products? And then picked up on a theme that you mentioned toward the end about what is inevitable and what can be avoided. Usually it ends with someone saying, someone's going to use this technology. It's inevitable that would happen. So can we even mitigate this drift?
Yeah. So to the first question, I'm not aware of any institutional efforts. That's not to say they might exist. I'm not aware of any at the moment. What does happen is that sometimes investigators conducting a study will ask will ask an institution, I'm thinking of an example here at Penn, to set aside some amount of funds to support the participant, should they need the funds. But I'm not aware of any sort of institutional policies. Second question, is this all inevitable? Something I think about a lot. And I think it's given the amount of money invested in this space, this is not sort of startups out of their basement, right? This is Elon Musk, who seemingly has an ability to raise a lot of money and push his ideas forward. So I don't know. I hope it's not inevitable. I would like to think that it's not inevitable, and I'd like to think that there are ways that we can impact it, but I don't know. Yeah.
So this is sort of going back to the first and second parts of your sort of breakdown of what you're talking about. So the first one is about these companies potentially withdrawing or not being able to support the devices that are already implanted in people, and therefore the people losing the potential benefits. And the second one is about, are these privacy concerns unique to neurotechnologies and neural implants? Are those ethical issues of people no longer having access to an effective clinical trial, for example, intervention, unique to neural implants, or do they also apply in clinical trial contexts outside of that, and what sorts of frameworks exist for managing them in those spaces?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So it's about, are there other, right? Is this, our post-trial responsibility questions and frameworks unique? I don't think the sort of overall question of sort of what are the long-term responsibilities of investigators to research participants, I don't think they are unique, but I think this is a unique instantiation of them, given that the hardware is implanted. So you could think about in gene editing, right? There could be, certain responsibilities that investigators have. Maybe there's sort of negative effects that only become apparent 10 years down the line, right? Is that related, right? Are those effects related to the therapy, right? Who supports the, treatment in that case? So I don't think it's the ethics isn't unique, but I think it's unique sort of in the context where you have this hardware that's implanted in your body for investigational purposes. There hasn't been, one sort of obvious place to look is cardiology and sort of the history of pacemakers. I've always wanted to do a study that looks more into that. I haven't seen anybody actually delve into that. From talking to people in cardiology, I get the sense that there's less of sort of like a startup vibe and culture, at least at the moment, with cardiology. So in the neuro space, there's a lot of different neurotech startups trying things out for a lot of indications, some of them not as well funded, as others. And so I think it's become more of an issue where I don't think we have many cardiology, or at least as many startups trying out completely new things. It's usually sort of a modification on an existing device, where maybe that device can revert back to a standard of care device after the trial is over.
Is the concern about leaving the devices in that there's some continued risk to the trial participant, or is it that they're not continuing to get a benefit that they had anticipated or experienced, or maybe it's both?
I think it's both. So one is them not getting the benefit, and there are risks. So you could say, why don't we just explant them? And so actually in a lot of studies, people are explanted. Sometimes it is riskier to explant rather than keep it in, because the tissue can grow sort of over the device. So that's actually it's typically a riskier procedure. And so some people might not want to actually go through that. Then what they have are devices that they typically are contraindicated for MRI scans, for example. And so if they move somewhere else, they move to a new part of the country, and then they have this device that nobody's ever heard of because the experiment stopped 10 years ago, and they have this device in their head, like, how do they get regular care? So I think it's both.
I'm just gonna follow up on Andy's question too. The enhancement examples that you provided are also like fairly typical of the sorts of things that we think about in bioethics. So are there any distinct concerns that you're seeing around neural enhancement because of the implanted brain interface, or is it just kind of run-of-the-mill enhancement concerns that it's not going to be available to everyone and that type of thing?
Yeah, so I guess that's why I'm less interested in the sort of downstream enhancement issues and more interested in sort of how does this affect things now, because I think it is more of the yes, the access issues are, but some people argue the brain is unique and therefore maybe these issues are more salient because of that, but I'm not sure I buy that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if like what I'm about to ask is a little ignorant. This is not, I don't work on this, but I've been working on something that touches on this, and it's research with brain organoids. And and they're already, before we even know to the extent of the use, the risks and benefits to the organoid, we're already plugging them to AIs to see what happens, right? Like, on one hand, people are worried that AI can become humanized. On the other hand, people are worried about organoids to be more human. So I want to go back to your point. What's unique about the brain? Why am I worried about the brain organoid and not the liver organoids or the kidney organoids?
Why are you?
I don't know. That's why the project keeps going in the back burner for so long, because it's a hard question to answer.
I mean, I think
It's a hard, sorry, it's a hard question to answer, if we're getting a drink at a bar, like, I can tell you, like, dude, these are my thoughts, that, but it's a difficult question to answer in a professional field at a forum where you actually have to provide a substantive analytical answer, right?
Yeah, so I think with the brain organoid example, I think the worry is, right, that these organoids might become conscious in some, right? The fear is that some have expressed, right? They might become conscious, they might start to resemble a thinking mind, and maybe we shouldn't interfere or experiment with a thinking mind, or maybe they can feel pain. So I think the concern is that it sort of starts to maybe get us closer to looking at something human. And then at what point do we know if it does, and do we care, and how do we measure that?
Yeah, but what is so important about the brain? Because I'm thinking about the enhancement here, right? So I do see this as inevitable, right? There's already a market in it, and we all love enhancements. What's so unique about this brain enhancement? For example, when the iPhone came, the smartphones came out, huge privacy, like, people can bring these iPhones to the bathrooms. People can bring these iPhones. Yes, they could. And you had them for 25 years. They do. And everybody loves them now, right? So what's unique about the brain privacy and the brain that we're doing now, right? What's unique about this that is not unique to other enhancements?
I mean, it's a good question. I think there also like in the privacy, I think there are two camps where some people will be like, this is different. This is unique. The brain is the seat of consciousness. It's where we have our most private thoughts. It's manipulable, right? You can manipulate it in certain ways and it needs protection. You could also not believe that at all. You could say nothing is unique about the brain. Maybe there is nothing unique. This is just a really interesting instance, of these questions coming up that merits our attention. And I think that's true also. It's a big debate in neuroethics, right? Is there something that's exceptional or unique about the brain that we should treat this differently? Or is this another instantiation of familiar questions? And I think either way you go, it's still need to maybe pay attention to the space and think about it.
Thank you, Anna.